Officer saw a boy, frozen on the sidewalk. Canine dog noticed the pants. Then they did the unthinkable. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stood there, 7 years old, shaking in the snow, pants soaked, eyes hollow. The others laughed. The driver ignored. And the world moved on. Until one officer saw what no one else did. Or rather, his canine partner did. A German shepherd with instincts sharper than any siren who refused to look away. They say dogs can't speak. But that day, Ranger screamed with his silence. What he uncovered would shake a town, expose the truth, and save a life just in time. What happened next will break your heart and then mend it. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far Ranger's voice can reach. And if you believe no child and no dog should ever be ignored again, hit that subscribe button. Because this story will stay with you forever. Maple Creek, Colorado, was a quiet town in winter. Too quiet for Officer Eli Turner's taste. That morning, the snow had settled in deep overnight, leaving the roads glassy and the sidewalks untouched, as if the world had been placed under glass. Snowflakes fell in slow spirals under the dull, pewter sky, and the temperature clung just below freezing. Pine Hollow Road, usually buzzing with early commuters, lay near silent, broken only by the occasional growl of an engine or the creak of ice-strained trees. Eli drove slowly, tires crunching over packed snow as his eyes scanned the familiar edges of Maplewood Elementary's school zone. He wore his Navy patrol uniform under a thick charcoal coat, the zipper pulled up to his throat. A gray scarf, knitted years ago by his late mother, was tucked neatly under his collar. His black hair, flecked with premature gray, was cropped short and matched the tight stubble on his jaw. His sharp blue eyes moved methodically, as always, missing nothing. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Ranger, his canine partner of 4 years. Ranger was a 6-year-old German shepherd, lean, strong, with a broad chest and powerful frame. His coat was deep sable and black, thick and gleaming even in the muted light. A thin white scar curved behind his left ear, a souvenir from a nighttime pursuit the previous winter. Ranger sat upright and alert, his gaze sharp, tail still, ears constantly twitching at every subtle sound beyond the windshield. He was trained to track, defend, detect narcotics, and, if necessary, bring down a fleeing suspect. But more than any of that, he had a sense for things Eli could never explain. And lately, Eli had needed him more than ever. As he turned the cruiser past the eastern edge of the school, his thoughts drifted. Just 2 days ago, he'd been pulled into a meeting with the new deputy chief, young, freshly transferred from Boulder, and already swinging a budgetary axe. "We're cutting back, Eli," she had said, hands folded neatly, expression unreadable. "The K-9 unit is expensive. Liability, maintenance, overtime, hard to justify in a town this quiet." Eli had tried to argue, pointed to Ranger's record, his role in missing person cases, the comfort he'd brought to children in trauma calls. But the decision had already been drafted. A vote was coming. Ranger's future, and the entire K-9 division, was hanging by a thread. He hadn't told anyone. Not yet. And he hadn't told Ranger either, as if saying it aloud would make it real. Now, in the growing stillness, Ranger suddenly sat up straighter. Eli noticed immediately. "What is it?" The dog let out a short, sharp bark, unusual in quiet patrols like this, and leaned forward, pressing his nose to the window. Then he growled, low and deliberate, his gaze locked on something ahead. Eli squinted toward the bus shelter just off the school lot, half concealed behind a cluster of snow-draped pine trees. At first glance it looked empty, but then he saw it. Scattered footprints in the snow, chaotic, overlapping. They led toward the far end of the shelter, then vanished around the side. Ranger barked again, loud, urgent. Before Eli could open the door, Ranger lunged forward, straining against his harness. His tail was stiff, his ears forward, his whole body tense. Okay, hold on." Eli muttered, yanking the cruiser into park and stepping out into the cold. The icy wind slapped him across the face, but he didn't stop. Ranger was already leading, pulling on the leash with purpose. They moved past the shelter entrance, around the rear, where the footprints deepened in the snow, mingled with drag marks and something darker, possibly slush, possibly something else. Then they saw him. A small boy sat curled at the far corner of the shelter, back against the wooden frame. His red flannel jacket was soaked through, and his jeans were a dark, frozen mess clinging to his legs. His blonde hair was limp, stuck to his forehead with melted snow. His eyes were wide, red-rimmed, and he shivered violently. Urine soaked the fabric from his waist down. Eli's breath caught. Ranger slowed, letting out a soft, almost mournful sound. He sat beside Eli, ears flattened slightly, watching the boy but not moving closer. "Hey, kiddo," Eli said gently, crouching down slowly. "I'm Officer Turner. This is Ranger. We're not here to scare you. We're here to help." The boy didn't answer. He looked at Ranger, then at Eli, then back at the snowy ground. Tears streaked his face, half frozen. Eli noted the bruising along the child's right cheekbone. Fresh, likely impact trauma. The boy looked around 7, Caucasian, underweight. His backpack strap was torn. His boots were too small. "What's your name, son?" Eli asked. The boy blinked, jaw trembling. Lucas," he whispered. "Lucas, all right," Eli said softly, taking off his gloves and unzipping his coat. He slipped it from his shoulders and carefully draped it over the boy's. "You're okay now. You're not alone." Lucas flinched as the coat touched him, but didn't pull away. His small fingers gripped the sleeves tightly, as if the fabric itself could keep him from disappearing. Ranger shifted beside them, lowering his head. He let out a soft exhale that stirred the snow near Lucas's boots. Eli looked down at the boy's soaked pants, at the bruise, at the sheer fear behind those eyes. "Can I sit here with you for a moment?" he asked. Lucas gave the faintest nod. So Eli sat, quiet. No questions, no radio, just him, Ranger, and the boy shivering between them on a cold wooden bench in a town that suddenly didn't feel so quiet anymore. Snow clung to the back of the wooden bench like dust on forgotten furniture. The air had dropped another few degrees in the last 10 minutes, and even though Eli could handle the cold, he noticed how Lucas's small shoulders had begun to curl inward, shivering not only from weather, but from something much deeper. Ranger sat beside him, unmoving yet alert, ears pivoting toward every rustle in the wind. Lucas kept his gaze low, fixed on the slushy ground below his boots. His lips had turned a soft, purplish hue, and the fabric of Eli's jacket hung over his shoulders like a blanket too large for his small frame. Eli, still crouched in front of the boy, watched him closely. "Lucas," he said softly, "do you remember what happened this morning?" The boy blinked. A tear slid down his bruised cheek and disappeared into the collar of the coat. His hands clutched at the sleeves. "I told him," Lucas murmured. "I said I had to go. Real bad. I asked. I begged him to stop, but he said no." Ranger stirred. His nose twitched. A faint sound came from him, a low, whining growl barely audible. Eli noticed it immediately. "You begged him?" Eli asked, voice level. Lucas nodded. "He said I could hold it. He laughed. Said it was just a few more blocks, but I couldn't hold it." The shame in his voice was unbearable. Eli felt his gut twist. Lucas wrapped his arms around his stomach and bent forward slightly. "It hurts," he whispered. "It really hurts." Eli gently placed a hand on the boy's back. That's when Ranger shifted again. He rose to his feet, tail low, and circled Lucas slowly. His posture had changed, alert but controlled. He moved in close, then lowered his head toward the right side of Lucas's torso. He sniffed once, twice, and then let out a short, guttural growl. Eli stiffened. "What is it, boy?" Ranger didn't answer, of course, but his instincts were speaking louder than any siren. He nudged his nose gently at the side of Lucas's coat, once, twice, then looked directly at Eli. Trusting the message, Eli knelt down further and gently unzipped the jacket. "Lucas, I'm going to take a quick look, okay? I promise I'll be careful." Lucas gave a hesitant nod, still clutching his stomach. As Eli peeled back the coat and lifted the hem of the boy's sweatshirt, he froze. Just beneath the ribs on Lucas's right side, blood had soaked through the thermal layer of his shirt, a dark stain spreading beneath a bluish-purple bruise. Eli exhaled sharply through his nose. "Jesus!" The boy flinched. "Am I going to be in trouble?" "No," Eli said firmly. "No, Lucas, you are not in trouble." Ranger let out a soft, distressed huff, then sat again, closer this time, his flank pressing lightly against the boy's leg. Eli reached for his radio but hesitated, eyes scanning the empty street. Across the road, just beyond the chain-link fence lining the school parking lot, movement caught his eye. A tall figure stood half-concealed behind the battered frame of a crossing guard sign. It was a teenage boy, maybe 12 or 13, with a slim frame and shaggy brown hair tucked beneath the hood of a green puffer jacket. His hands were stuffed in the pockets. His jeans were frayed and his sneakers looked soaked from trudging through slush. Owen Lambert. Eli had seen him around campus before, always alone, always quiet. Owen was the type of kid who answered with nods instead of words, who sat in the back of the cafeteria even when there were empty tables up front. Right now, Owen was staring, not curious, not confused, but afraid. And then he pulled a phone from his coat and raised it, just for a second, before hurriedly putting it away and backing out of view. Ranger's head turned. He saw him too. Eli narrowed his eyes but let it go, for now. He turned back to Lucas, who now trembled visibly. "I'll call help, all right? We're going to get you looked at, but I need to know who pushed you." Lucas looked up at Eli, face tight with something between pain and fear. "It was Bryce. After I got off the bus, he was laughing and he shoved me into the seat hard. Then, someone else kicked me when I was on the ground. I don't know who." Eli clenched his jaw. "Okay, that's enough for now." He lifted the radio and clicked in. "Dispatch, this is Turner. I've got a 7-year-old male with suspected internal injury, visible bleeding and bruising on the right rib cage, urgently requesting medical support at Maplewood Elementary bus stop. Weather's dropping, and he's hypothermic." "Copy that, Turner. EMS en route, ETA 6 minutes." Ranger let out a sharp bark, as if to punctuate the moment. Eli looked back toward the alley where Owen had vanished. There was something in that boy's face that didn't sit right. Not guilt, not defiance. Fear. Ranger nudged Eli's leg and let out a soft, almost encouraging exhale. The dog's breath fogged in the cold, fading like smoke. Eli gave him a glance. "Yeah, I know. We're not done yet." But for now, he kept his hand steady on Lucas's shoulder, kept Ranger close, and waited as sirens began to echo faintly in the distance. The sound of sirens drew closer, a rising wail threading through the cold air like a blade. Eli stood just behind Lucas, who now sat slumped against the side of the bus shelter, wrapped in the oversized police jacket like a child inside a borrowed world. His breath came in soft clouds, uneven and strained. Ranger stood beside him, still but pulsing with alertness, every muscle taut beneath his dark coat. Then came the squeal of brakes. A yellow school bus turned the corner and came to a halt, its hulking shape cutting across the edge of the sidewalk like a steel barrier against the snow. The engine coughed. The door hissed. It hadn't gone far, just around the block, likely finishing the route. And now, as if nothing had happened, it was back. Eli's jaw tightened. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Ranger, heel!" Ranger moved into position at his side, head high, tail level. The bus door creaked open, and out stepped the driver, a man in his mid-50s, paunchy, with a patchy beard and a faded Denver Broncos beanie perched atop thinning gray hair. His nameplate read M. Lafferty. His expression was impatient, bordering on annoyed. "You the one with the radio call?" Lafferty asked, eyes squinting as if the snow were somehow a personal inconvenience. Eli didn't answer right away. He stared at the man, letting the silence do its work. "I've got a schedule to keep," Lafferty added. "Can't hold up the whole route because one kid wets his pants." Eli stepped closer. "That child is injured, and crying, and alone." Lafferty scoffed. "Not my problem. I told him to hold it. We were 2 minutes from the school. These kids need to toughen up." Behind Eli, Ranger let out a deep growl, the kind that came from his chest, not his throat. Lafferty glanced down. "That dog, always this dramatic?" Eli didn't answer. Instead, he walked forward toward the open door. "Open the back. I want to see the seating." "You think something happened on my bus?" Lafferty asked, arms crossed. "I think something didn't happen, something that should have, like an adult doing his job." Without waiting for permission, Eli stepped up onto the first stair. Ranger followed, paws landing softly but purposefully on the metal steps. The air inside the bus was warmer, but stale. The scent of old vinyl, sweat, and chewing gum clung to everything. At the rear, a cluster of middle schoolers sat hunched in the back row, laughing, whispering, jostling like they were still at recess. Then Ranger moved. In a sudden leap, he bounded up the narrow aisle and lunged toward the back row. Eli barely had time to react. "Ranger!" But the dog didn't attack. He stopped abruptly, planting himself in the center aisle and barking once, twice, loud and sharp. The sound rang through the bus like a gunshot. The boys in the back row jumped. One of them, a boy with brown curly hair and a black hoodie, immediately pulled his hood up and turned his face away. Eli marched toward them. "Names," he said. "Now." One boy muttered, "Jake." Another said, "Tommy." The one who had turned away remained silent. Eli stared at him. "You." The boy's voice was barely a whisper. "Bryce." Bryce had the look of a kid who'd been in trouble before, not from violence but from arrogance. His posture was defiant, but his eyes betrayed him. They flicked between Eli and Ranger with a kind of restless calculation, as if weighing what would cost less, the lie or the truth. Eli took a slow breath. "Lucas says he was pushed into a seat and kicked after he fell. That happen here?" No one spoke. Bryce kept his eyes down. Ranger growled again, not loud, just low, constant. His gaze locked on Bryce like a sniper scope. "Get that dog out of my face," Bryce mumbled. "He's not in your face," Eli replied. "He's reading it." Lafferty had stepped back up to the front, arms still crossed. "Cho, come beat Jihet," he muttered under his breath. Ranger turned his head sharply, not at the noise, but at the tone. He growled again, louder now. One of the other kids flinched. Eli turned to the driver. "You're done talking. Sit on the steps. I'll deal with you later." Lafferty opened his mouth to argue, but something in Eli's voice made him think better of it. He backed out of the aisle and slumped onto the bottom stair. That was when a new voice entered. "Is this the boy?" A woman approached from the sidewalk, moving carefully over the snow. She wore dark scrubs beneath a navy peacoat and a thick knit scarf. In her late 30s, tall and willowy, with pale skin and long auburn hair tied in a simple braid, Clara Doyle looked more like a librarian than a nurse, but her eyes were focused and calm, the kind of calm that came from someone who had seen pain and didn't panic. "I'm a nurse," she said. "Clara Doyle. I was walking to the clinic when I saw the cruiser. Thought maybe someone could use a hand." Eli nodded. "Lucas is outside, near the shelter. EMS is en route. He's stable for now." Clara followed Eli's eyes to Ranger, who was still staring at Bryce, body tense, chest rising and falling with sharp, steady breaths. "He's not just guarding him," she said quietly. "He's calling him out." Eli glanced at her. "You see that?" "I see dogs in trauma cases all the time," Clara replied. "Most of them just comfort. But your boy here, he's a witness." Eli nodded once. "That's why they want to shut the program down." Clara gave a half smile. "Then you better make this one count." Outside, the sirens were closer now. Eli stepped back and called to Ranger. "Let's go." Ranger gave one final deliberate stare at Bryce, who still refused to look up, then turned and trotted down the aisle. Eli followed. The ER at Maple Creek General was lit with a harsh, clinical brightness that felt at odds with the softness of the snow-covered world outside. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above as the smell of antiseptic clung to every surface. It was a small hospital by most standards, just 2 floors and 1 trauma bay, but for a quiet town like this, it was usually enough. Lucas lay on a padded bed in an isolated examination room, dwarfed by the crisp white sheets. His shoes had been removed, soaked socks replaced by thermal hospital booties, and a heated blanket draped over his thin frame. His blonde hair was matted with sweat, his face pale against the pillow. The bruise under his right eye had darkened, and his breathing had become shallow and slow. A tall doctor in green scrubs stood at the foot of the bed, flipping through a digital chart. His name was Dr. Noel Merrick, a stoic man in his early 50s with iron-gray hair and rectangular glasses perched low on his nose. Despite the deep frown lines on his brow, his hands moved with precision, like a man used to working under pressure. He turned to Eli. "His temperature's low. We've got him on fluids. He's showing signs of moderate hypothermia, and I'm concerned about infection." "Infection?" Eli asked, arms crossed tightly over his uniform. "His bladder may be inflamed," Dr. Merrick replied. "Probably from holding it in too long and then urinating under distress. Combine that with physical trauma, likely to the abdominal muscles or lower ribs, he's at risk for complications. We've sent for blood and urine panels, but he needs rest and observation for now." Eli glanced down at the boy whose eyes were open but distant, focused on the blank ceiling tiles. "He hasn't said a word since we got here." "He may be too ashamed to talk," Merrick said gently, "or he's afraid no one will believe him." The door creaked open behind them. A nurse entered, short and soft-spoken, with gentle crow's feet framing her brown eyes. Her ID badge read Cindy Lasky, and her warm tone contradicted the sterile setting around her. She handed Merrick a clipboard and gave Eli a quick glance. "Still no change." Cindy was known in town as the nurse who talked more to kids than adults, and with good reason, she had a calming way of standing that made her seem smaller than her frame. As she adjusted the IV line at Lucas's arm, the boy flinched ever so slightly. He didn't look at her. "Has he said anything about who did this?" Cindy asked softly. Eli shook his head. "Not yet." The door pushed open again, this time with a deliberate shove. Ranger trotted in, nails tapping against the floor, tail lowered but not tucked. Eli had left him waiting in the cruiser during intake, but something in his chest had told him to bring the dog in. Rules be damned. As soon as Lucas saw him, something changed. The boy's chest hitched, his eyes blinked, glassy, and then his lip quivered. "Ranger." The word came out like an apology and a plea all at once. Eli stepped aside. Ranger walked straight to the bed without hesitation and rested his front paws on the edge, sniffing gently at Lucas's hand. Lucas reached out with trembling fingers and wrapped them around Ranger's neck. He buried his face into the dog's fur, and then, in a voice muffled by fur and grief, he spoke. He pushed me, and then he laughed. When I fell, he kicked me in the side, said I smelled like a baby, and then they all laughed." Eli's eyes closed for half a second. He knelt beside the bed. "Was it Bryce?" Lucas nodded into Ranger's fur. "Bryce and 2 others, but Bryce told them to do it." "Why didn't you say anything before?" Lucas pulled back and looked at Eli, eyes red-rimmed but clearer. "I didn't think anyone would listen." Ranger let out a soft, contented exhale, as if confirming the truth had finally arrived. From the doorway, a voice broke the silence. "That dog shouldn't be in here." Eli turned. Deputy Chief Renee Holloway, a woman in her early 40s with a severe jawline and blazer too thin for the weather, stood with her arms folded. She had joined the department 6 months ago, transferred from Denver, and had made quick work of implementing policy, much of it focused on reducing excess spending. Her straight black hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her expression was carved in stone. "Hospital floor's not a crime scene," she said. "You're not on K-9 deployment protocol. This is a violation, Officer Turner." Eli stood, slow and deliberate. "With respect, ma'am, this kid hadn't said a word in over an hour. Ranger walks in and suddenly he opens up." "That doesn't justify ignoring policy," she replied. "You'll need to document your reasoning if you want to avoid a suspension." "I'll document it," Eli said evenly, "but I'll write one more line than required." She raised an eyebrow. "I'll write that if I hadn't brought Ranger in, I might have lost the only witness to his own abuse." Ranger, still standing quietly beside Lucas, didn't move. Holloway didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away, heels clicking sharply on the linoleum floor. Back inside the room, Nurse Cindy exhaled quietly. "I don't know much about policy," she said, adjusting the IV again, "but that dog just did more than half our staff could." Dr. Merrick nodded once. "Let him stay. If the boy rests, it's worth it." Eli pulled a chair close to the bed. Ranger laid down at Lucas's side, his chin resting near the boy's hip. The storm outside had begun again, flakes tapping lightly at the window. Inside, the silence was no longer painful. It was the silence of something settling, of something safe. The snowfall had eased into a lazy drift by late afternoon, casting Maple Creek in a delicate stillness as though the town itself were trying to hold its breath. But Eli Turner had no time for stillness. He stood beside the idling school bus, its yellow paint now flecked with slush and grime. Behind him, the cruiser engine purred low. In the back seat, Ranger's head rested on the ledge of the open window, ears perked, eyes locked on the students being dismissed one by one into their parents' cars. The principal had agreed to pull Bryce and the two boys Lucas had vaguely identified: Jake Thurman, lanky and loud with a permanently smug smirk, and Riley Kent, shorter, with a twitchy demeanor and a habit of chewing on hoodie strings, aside for questioning. Eli waited by the sidewalk as the three boys approached, flanked by Vice Principal Ellen Navarro, a sharp-featured woman in her early 50s with tightly pulled-back, silver-streaked hair. She walked with the straight-backed rigidity of someone who never forgot her Marine Corps years. Her no-nonsense stare made even the more confident students wilt. "They've agreed to show you their bags," Navarro said. "I haven't questioned them directly, figured you'd prefer to handle it." Eli nodded. "Thanks for that." The boys said nothing. Bryce had his arms crossed over his chest, jaw tight. Jake tried to act casual, shifting from foot to foot, while Riley kept glancing toward the bus like he wanted to be anywhere but here. Eli turned back to his cruiser. "Ranger, out!" The German shepherd leapt out with effortless grace, landing silently beside his handler. He took one look at the boys, sniffed the air, and began to pace slowly toward them, nose twitching. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Eli said. "Ranger's trained to detect specific scents: blood, drugs, fear." "Fear?" Jake scoffed. "You serious?" But the bravado faded quickly as Ranger came to a stop directly in front of Bryce's backpack, which was slung low and half unzipped. The dog growled, a deep rumbling sound that cut through the air like static. Bryce took a half-step back. "He's just mad 'cause I didn't pet him," he muttered. Eli ignored the deflection and pointed. "Hand me the bag." Bryce hesitated. "Now." Reluctantly, he slid the bag off his shoulder and passed it over. Eli set it on the hood of the cruiser, unzipped it carefully. Inside, loose notebooks, an energy bar wrapper, a math workbook, and near the bottom, balled into a corner, a crumpled tissue smeared faintly with dried blood. Next to it, tucked between two folders, was a short length of nylon cord, about 12 inches long, frayed at both ends. "Bryce," Eli said, voice low, "you want to explain this?" Bryce didn't answer. "Jake? Riley?" Still silence. Navarro folded her arms, watching, unimpressed. "This looks bad, boys." "It's not what you think," Jake blurted. "We didn't tie him up or anything. Bryce just had the rope 'cause we were going to use it for, sledding tricks, that's all." Eli stared. "Sledding? Tricks?" I mean, not tricks like that, just like pulling it behind a bike, Jake stammered. And the tissue? He fell. Hit the seat, Bryce said finally, his tone tight. It's not my fault he's soft. Ranger growled again, this time louder, a more insistent tone. He moved beside Eli and sat down, ears forward, eyes locked on Bryce. Eli pulled out his phone. Then maybe the bus camera tells a different story. He opened the cloud-linked drive the school had provided. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. It showed Lucas being pushed toward the back of the bus, stumbling. Bryce's arm extended toward the back of Lucas's neck, shoving him down into the seat. Jake leaned forward, laughing, while Riley appeared to fumble with something, likely the rope. There was a brief struggle. Lucas's arms flailed. Someone kicked. Lucas dropped to the floor. Then a hand, Bryce's, pressed something against the boy's face. Eli turned the screen toward the boys. Jake looked like he might be sick. Riley turned away completely, and Bryce went still. Ranger stood again, stepped forward, and let out a growl so deep it buzzed in his chest. Not one of aggression, but certainty. Ranger knew it, Eli said, before I even asked. He smelled the blood on you. The fear, the adrenaline. Bryce looked up finally. He's just a dog. No, Eli said. He's the reason we're even standing here now. Navarro stepped forward. Gentlemen, I suggest you all follow Officer Turner's instructions from this point on. We'll be calling your parents. All of them. Bryce's face cracked for the first time. Not rage, panic. Eli turned away. His hands were tight at his sides, but his voice remained steady. This isn't just schoolyard bullying. This is assault. As the boys were escorted inside, Ranger sat quietly beside the cruiser again, the breeze teasing the tips of his ears. Across the street, a silver sedan pulled up and parked hastily near the sidewalk, and a woman emerged quickly, Amanda Lorne, Lucas's mother. Amanda was in her early 30s with the exhausted, no-makeup look of someone whose life had become a triage of work and worry. Her blonde hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and her hospital scrubs were wrinkled beneath a puffy beige coat. Her hands were bare despite the cold. Her eyes scanned the parking lot frantically until they found Eli. "Where is he?" she asked, voice thin and shaking. "He's at Maple Creek General," Eli said gently. "Stable. Getting rest." Amanda pressed a hand to her mouth, closing her eyes. "God, I only let him take the bus today. Just today. My dad. He's been getting worse. I had to leave early." "You couldn't have known," Eli said. "But he's safe now. And he talked. Thanks to Ranger." Amanda looked down at the dog, who stood, tail low, watching her. "You were with him?" Ranger stepped forward, nudged gently at her hand, then sat. Amanda let out a sound between a sob and a laugh. "I don't know what would have happened without him," she whispered. Eli said nothing. He didn't need to. The truth was right in front of them. The morning after the video was posted, the town of Millstone awoke to a fury of headlines, hashtags, and heartfelt cries. Local forums buzzed with the name Ranger. Not as a pet, but as a sentinel, a silent witness with a snarl sharper than any word spoken. The images were everywhere. A photo of Ranger growling at the back of the school bus, and another, softer one, showing him curled gently beside Lucas's hospital bed, his eyes half closed but watchful. Inside the modest Millstone Police Department, Officer Eli Turner sat at his desk, a plain folder of disciplinary documents open before him. His jaw was tight, back straight, but the veins in his temple betrayed the pressure simmering beneath. Across from him sat Captain James Dalton, late 50s, tall and iron-spined, with a salt-and-pepper mustache and a tone always measured, almost judicial. "Eli," the captain said, setting down his reading glasses, "you know what this is about." "I do, sir." Dalton exhaled, glancing at Ranger, who lay calmly by the door, ears alert but head resting on crossed paws. "You took a K-9 unit into a civilian scene without prior clearance. That alone could be grounds for suspension. But—" He gestured toward the newspaper on the desk where the bold headline read, Witness dog exposes school bus bullying. The entire damn town thinks your dog just cracked open a case better than any detective. Eli met his gaze. Because he did. Dalton didn't argue. Instead, he closed the folder but didn't slide it away. There's still a review board hearing. Just be prepared. Meanwhile, at Millstone Middle School, the mood was shifting too. Bryce Harper, once smug, loud, and untouchable, now walked with a slouch in his step and silence on his lips. His dark brown hair, usually gelled back, hung over his eyes. After the video surfaced and the footage from the bus confirmed his actions, he'd been suspended indefinitely. In the school counselor's office, Bryce sat across from Ms. Lillian Marks, a gentle yet firm woman in her early 40s with auburn curls and reading glasses always perched halfway down her nose. "Do you understand why you're here, Bryce?" she asked, voice calm but edged. Bryce didn't answer at first. His fingers tugged at the frayed edge of his hoodie sleeve. "He peed himself," he muttered finally, voice trembling with more shame than scorn. "It was gross. And, I don't know, they laughed. I laughed too, but I didn't think he'd bleed." Lillian's expression didn't soften. "He begged you to stop. You helped hold him down." There was a pause. Then, for the first time since the video went viral, Bryce's shoulders shook. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I was just trying to be... I don't know. I didn't mean to hurt him like that." Back at the hospital, Lucas lay quietly, drawing something with a dull blue crayon. Ranger lay beside him, his tail tapping softly every few seconds like a heartbeat. Amanda, Lucas's mother, had returned after her late shift at the care home. Still in scrubs, her tired green eyes brimmed with gratitude and worry. She gently touched Lucas's cheek. "He asked where Ranger was when he woke up," she whispered to Eli, who stood quietly by the doorway. "He said the dog made him feel safe, safer than grown-ups." Eli smiled faintly. "He's got that effect." At that moment, Clara, the nurse from earlier, stepped in. "They want to release Lucas tomorrow, pending observation, but there's something else." She handed over a document. It was the termination report for Howard Finch, the bus driver. Millstone Unified reviewed the footage, complaints from other parents, and medical evidence, Clara explained. They've officially fired him and revoked his school bus license. The board cited neglect of duty, failure to protect, and endangering a minor. He's also being reviewed by Child Protective Services. Eli nodded, jaw tight. "Good. That man should have never been near children." As if on cue, Jenny Cortez, local news anchor for Channel 7, stepped into the hospital lobby. Petite and quick-witted, Jenny was in her mid-30s with jet-black hair cut in a sharp bob, a pale lavender scarf wrapped around her throat, and a voice that could disarm or devastate depending on the angle of her story. "I'm not here for sensation, Officer Turner," she said, lifting her press badge. "The town deserves to know about the officer and the K-9 who stepped in when no one else did." Eli didn't respond right away. Ranger stood and trotted up beside him, his gaze steady. Jenny lowered her camera slightly and whispered, "He doesn't act like any dog I've ever seen. He looks straight into the lens, like he knows it matters." Then she turned it back on. The red recording light blinked. "Officer Turner, what do you think Ranger saw that the adults missed?" Eli didn't blink. "Pain," he said simply. "Ignored pain. The kind you can't explain in words, but that dogs, they just feel it." Ranger let out a soft woof, then sat with his head held high. Jenny zoomed in. It wasn't just a viral story now, it was a reckoning. That evening, the local school board held an emergency town hall meeting. Parents filled the small auditorium, some angry, many ashamed. Others clutched handwritten signs. "Protect our kids. No more silence on the bus. Thank you, Ranger." As the meeting adjourned, one mother leaned toward another and whispered, "If that dog hadn't barked, no one would have known." And she was right. The sun had begun to set over Millstone, washing the sky in soft tones of amber and lavender. Winter's grip remained, but the snow now glistened instead of suffocating, as though even the season had taken a breath. Inside room 213 of the Millstone General Hospital, Lucas lay curled on his side, eyes wide open though the room was dim. He was healing, physically, at least. The bruises along his ribs had faded into soft yellows and greens, and the cut along his hip was beginning to scab over. But the fear, that stubborn, invisible shadow, clung to the boy's shoulders like a wet coat. Amanda, his mother, had fallen asleep in the corner armchair, her head resting against a rolled-up scarf. Her hands, though limp now, bore the cracks and lines of someone stretched thin between caregiving shifts and grief. Lucas didn't wake her. He simply stared into the dark. Then came the familiar rhythm of claws tapping tile. Soft, careful. Lucas turned his head just enough to see Ranger trotting in beside Officer Eli Turner. Eli looked exhausted. The heavy navy coat he wore hung a little lower these days, and his cheeks bore the scruff of sleepless nights. But his eyes, ever watchful, lit up when they met Lucas's. He gave a small nod and crouched beside the bed, letting Ranger step forward without command. "Evening, buddy," Eli whispered. "Thought we'd stop by before your dreams start." Ranger didn't bark or wag his tail like other dogs. Instead, he approached with silent gravity. The old scar on his left front leg, barely visible beneath his coat, caught the lamplight as he rested his chin on the edge of the bed. Lucas blinked fast, the tears pooling again. "I'm not funny," he whispered, voice cracking. "They laughed and said I was stupid. They all laughed." Ranger's eyes didn't flinch. He simply leaned forward and, from the worn pouch slung across Eli's chest, tugged something out gently with his teeth. It was a small wooden toy block, painted yellow, the edges chipped. Lucas recognized it immediately. It had been in his backpack, something he often fidgeted with when nervous. A week ago, he'd thrown it in frustration during a visit. Ranger had picked it up then. Tonight, Ranger placed it softly on Lucas's blanket, then stepped back and sat down, gaze calm but firm. Lucas let out a shaky laugh, not loud, but honest. "You kept it?" he whispered, touching the block. Ranger huffed softly, then lay down beside the bed, one paw resting against the bed frame like a silent guard. Eli didn't speak. He didn't need to. Tonight wasn't about words. Later that evening, after Amanda stirred and hugged her son tight, Eli stepped out into the cold with Ranger. The town was quieter now, as if even the sidewalks were waiting for something new. A message blinked on his phone. "Sheriff Walter Branson." Eli hesitated, then accepted the call. Walter's voice came through steady, though lower than usual. "Turner, meet me at the station. Back lot, 10 minutes. Eli glanced at Ranger. "What now?" The back lot of the Millstone PD was empty, lit by a single flickering lamppost. Sheriff Branson stood there, arms folded, wearing a brown leather jacket and worn Stetson hat. A tall man with a commanding frame, Walter was known for his stern demeanor, but those who truly knew him remembered that he'd served with Eli's father in Desert Storm. Tonight, however, the fire in his eyes was something else. "You're still technically suspended," he said, cutting straight to it, "but I'm not calling as your superior. I'm calling as a man watching a town wake up to its own shame." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Sir?" Walter stepped closer. "I want you and Ranger to lead a series of school sessions. Anti-bullying education, prevention, awareness. Hell, call it whatever you want. You two walk into a room, kids listen. That means something." Eli blinked. "With respect, I'm still under review." "I don't care," Walter said. "I'll list it under community outreach. No one's stopping me." He paused, then added more softly, "That dog. He didn't just stop a beating. He taught a whole damn town what we've been too scared to say. That silence has a cost." Eli nodded slowly. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the corner of the sheriff's coat. "And what about Ranger?" he asked. Walter glanced down at the German shepherd now sitting by Eli's side, posture alert, breath steady. "I've seen soldiers with less discipline than that dog. the sheriff muttered. "He's not just a K-9. He's an educator now." As they walked back toward the car, Eli gave Ranger a look, half grin, half awe. "You hear that, boy? They want you in the classroom now." Ranger didn't react, but when Eli opened the car door, he hopped in without hesitation, as if he understood the weight of what had just been offered. Snow fell in soft, deliberate silence over Maple Creek Elementary, covering the walkways, trees, and rooftops like a fresh beginning. It was the kind of morning that blanketed the past, not to hide it, but to soften it. The sky was a pale blue, the kind that made everything feel possible again. A dark patrol SUV pulled up beside the front gate, its tires crackling gently over the salt-dusted pavement. Inside sat Officer Eli Turner, now clean-shaven, wearing his reinstated uniform with polished boots and a badge that gleamed under the winter sun. He opened the back door carefully. Lucas stepped out slowly. The boy had grown quieter, more deliberate in how he moved. Today he wore a deep green coat zipped to the chin, a gray knit hat with a single yellow stripe, and a backpack that seemed slightly too large. His cheeks were pink from the cold, but his eyes, still guarded, had regained a flicker of warmth. Beside him leapt Ranger. The German shepherd's coat was brushed to a rich, healthy shine, his stance proud but calm. A new tag hung from his collar. Therapy, Dog of Honor, Millstone School District. Though unofficial in government classification, the title had been approved by the school board, unanimously. The two walked side by side toward the entrance. Children lined the snowy sidewalk, not in clusters of laughter or whispers, but in silent anticipation. Some held thermoses, others clutched notebooks to their chests. Every eye was on Lucas, and not one held ridicule. Then something shifted. As Lucas reached the school steps, a girl stepped forward. Small, with curly black hair and freckles, she extended a mitten-covered hand. "I saved you a seat at lunch," she said. Lucas looked at her, hesitated, then nodded. Behind him, Ranger moved forward and nuzzled the boy's glove gently, as if giving his own encouragement. Lucas took a breath, then another, and climbed the stairs without looking back. Eli, who watched from the sidewalk, exhaled deeply. "Atta boy," he murmured. Behind him, a small crowd had begun to gather near the school parking lot. Journalists, parents, even 2 district officials were present, not with protests or accusations, but with folded arms and nods of respect. Sheriff Walter Branson stepped forward, now wearing a navy blue scarf in place of his Stetson. He handed Eli a velvet box. Inside lay a silver medallion engraved with the words, "Service above self." "Ranger's medal," Walter said gruffly, "but you're holding it for him." Eli smiled and shook his head. "He'll wear it better than I will." As if on cue, Ranger padded over and sat tall. Eli crouched and gently pinned the medallion to the custom vest Ranger now wore. It was sewn with navy stitching, embroidered in white. "Speak with courage. Bark for justice." A nationwide program had been born, funded through both private and public efforts. Its mission, to bring officers and therapy canines into schools, not just as enforcers, but as protectors of dignity. Speak with courage, bark for justice, would travel to every county that welcomed them, starting with Millstone. At the back of the crowd, Amanda watched everything unfold. Dressed in her hospital scrubs with a parka thrown over, she stood beside her father in a wheelchair, a man with sharp cheekbones and weathered hands, smiling as though he'd never doubted his grandson's bravery. Eli approached her. "How's he doing today?" Amanda gave a tight-lipped smile. "He didn't ask to stay home. First time he's done that." They shared a moment of quiet before she added, "Thank you for not letting go." Eli looked at Ranger, who was now sniffing curiously at a snow-covered hedge as children passed him. "I didn't," he said, "but he never even thought about it." At lunchtime, Lucas sat at a round table, his lunch tray untouched for a moment. A boy named Bryce, now pale, thinner, and noticeably quiet, approached with a folded note. His usual cocky slouch had vanished. In its place stood a young boy learning shame the hard way. "I wrote it for you," Bryce mumbled, placing the paper down. I was wrong. Really wrong." Lucas didn't answer. He looked at Ranger instead, who was curled by his feet. The dog didn't move, didn't growl, only watched with eyes that had seen both cruelty and healing. Lucas finally picked up the note and nodded once. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they arrive on 4 paws, wearing a vest, with eyes that see what others won't. Ranger wasn't just a canine, he was a whisper from God. A reminder that silence doesn't mean weakness, and that justice can have fur, a wagging tail, and a heart braver than most humans. Lucas didn't just survive, he stood again, and in that quiet act of courage, we all saw a glimpse of something higher. So today, if this story touched your heart, even just a little, do something small but powerful. Share this video with someone who believes in second chances. Comment below with your thoughts or just write Amen if you believe God sends his angels in all forms, even as a dog. And if you want more stories like this, filled with hope, healing, and love, subscribe to our channel. Because the world needs reminders that goodness still exists. And sometimes it walks on 4 legs. May God bless you. May he protect the voiceless. And may we always choose to see the ones who are suffering before it's too late.